Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have a lot to talk about today. Major updates on Iran and Israel and how much Israel has accomplished in just a few days over Iran, and Iran now begging for mercy. I don't think it's going to happen super quickly here. We'll also take a look at the New York Times not only telling people not to vote for Zohran Mamdani, but actually tearing apart his arguments. I'm trying to figure out, Jim, who ended up replacing everyone at the New York Times editorial board and deciding that free markets were a good thing all of a sudden. And then later we're going to talk about that just crazy, horrific story in Minnesota where state legislators were targeted for assassination, and sadly one of them actually was killed. As some of you can probably tell, I got a cold for Father's Day. I also got a lot of nice things from my wife and my kids, so I don't want to diminish that. And Jim, I hope you had a good Father's Day too.
Well, thank you. I wished a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, yourself included. On weekends, I try to stay off the news just because, you cover it Monday through Friday, getting up early for the morning jolt all through the, late afternoon. Like, okay, I'm not going to, of course, Iran and Israel at war. So you're logging onto your phone, you're checking that. The worse the news got, the better the weekend was for me. I had a fantastic Father's Day. Everything was wonderful. And then every time I picked up my phone, death and destruction and assassinations, it was all the worst. So I hope everyone had a great weekend because the news was not going to cheer you up at any point in the last 48 hours.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of difficult stuff to talk about here, and we'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's talk about Open Phone, because if you're running a business, you know that every time you miss a call, you're leaving money on the table. And when every customer conversation matters, you need a phone system that keeps up and helps you stay connected. And that's why you need Open Phone.
Open Phone is the #1 business phone system that streamlines and scales your customer communications. It works through an app on your phone or computer, so you no longer have to carry around 2 phones or use a landline. With Open Phone, your team can share one number and collaborate on customer calls and texts like a shared inbox. That way, any teammate can pick up right where the last person left off, keeping response times faster than ever.
Make your life easier. That's what we always like to say here when it comes to your business. So Open Phone is now offering Three Martini Lunch listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/3ML. That's OPENPHONE.com/3ML. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Keep those numbers. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Jim, we last talked on Friday about the Israeli attacks on Iran. At that point, we hadn't seen much in the way of an Iranian response, and Israel certainly kept up the offensive or the defensive, depending on your position in terms of stopping the possible deployment of a nuclear weapon out of Iran. And so since then, the Iron Dome has worked quite effectively against Iranian missile barrages. That doesn't mean none of them have gotten through. Some of them have. To no surprise, the Iranians are targeting civilian populations while the Israelis are targeting military targets. So there have been a number of fatalities, a number of injuries. Thankfully, those numbers are relatively low. Of course, if it's your family, that number doesn't give you a lot of solace. But in terms of what's been accomplished over the skies of Iran, first of all, Israel claims it has total domination over the skies of Iran. They've allegedly taken out an oil facility. They've taken out missile stockpiles, which should help with what's coming in on the homeland. They've taken out more and more Iranian officials here. And we're, just 72, 96 hours into this thing, and you've already got the Wall Street Journal reporting that Iran is urgently signaling that it wants to end hostilities and restart nuclear talks, reportedly sending messages to Israel and the U.S. via intermediaries. I'm guessing they're going to get right on that, Jim. Maybe as soon as they figure out that they've gotten, what they want to accomplish accomplished. But what do you make of where we stand just a few days into this?
Well, if you're Israel, you're in no particular rush to end this conflict because you have not, apparently, as far as we know, they have not destroyed all of the nuclear facilities. They have not completely destroyed. There's some, optimistic things about the Natanz case, but not at another one. And, they're spread out all throughout the country. Now, if you have air superiority, if you have the ability to not just strike over Iran, and by the way, Iran is like 1/6 the size of the United States. It's a pretty darn big country. And so if you're taking off from Israel, They have the ability to do mid-air refueling. They have a limited number of mid-air of tanker jets that can do that. They're apparently doing them over Syria. Interesting contrary signals about whether that is done with the acquiescence of the new Syrian government or whether the new Syrian government really can't do anything about it one way or the other. So it's kind of yeah, sure, we're totally on board with this. And if, otherwise we're going to send out our MiG planes manufactured in 1986 up against the very best Israeli Air Force pilots and let them dogfight it out. I'm sure that'll go well for them. But, you look particularly at the eastern side of Iran. That is a long stretch away from Israel, which you'd have to do that kind of in-flight refueling. Couldn't help but notice a whole bunch of U.S. jets that do mid-air refueling took off from the United States and headed over towards Europe. Could be completely unrelated to this ongoing conflict. It could be the U.S. trying to keep their options open. But this was all done through open source information last night. I'm not revealing any U.S. secrets. Certainly seems intriguing in light of that. So far, the U.S. is not directly involved on any attacks on Iran, but they are helping shoot down the incoming ballistic missiles from Iran. The other interesting news of the weekend was reports from Reuters and a couple other news organizations saying that President Trump had vetoed an Israeli plan to kill Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That's not Khomeini from the 1980s, famous from the Naked Gun opening scene. That's Khamenei. And so the statement from an unidentified senior U.S. administration official, have the Iranians killed an American yet? No. Until they do, we're not even talking about going after the political leadership. Now, I could hear half the listeners jumping up out of their chairs saying, wait a second, yes, Iran has killed plenty of Americans. And apparently, roughly 1 out of every 6 American combat casualties in Iraq were attributable to Iran-backed militias and groups that were striking on behalf of Iran. But with that said, this is where I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, here goes Jim, ready to complain about Trump again. As far as I know, this might be the right move, even though the Iranians have attempted to kill Donald Trump and have attempted to kill several of his officials. I think the administration is correct that killing Khamenei would definitely be an escalation that would take this into probably a certain amount of rally around the flag effect for the Iranians. It's a question of who's the line of secession, and it doesn't necessarily get Israel where it wants to go. If, as they said, the stated objectives of this military operation are destroy the ballistic missile facilities and destroy the nuclear facilities. Netanyahu, in his interview with Bret Baier over the weekend, said, well, we're not aiming to cause regime change in Iran, but we really wouldn't mind to see it. We know this regime is very brittle and fragile, and it could collapse, and it could end up with new leadership in Iran. I think everybody in the West would love to see new leadership in Iran. And the more it's as this is going on, Greg, something I'm thinking about is, let's say you don't have regime change in Iran. Let's say you have Khamenei still in charge. Let's say you have most of the mullahs who are not dead still in charge. What is the relationship with Israel and the West and everything else? How do you, there's no going back from this. How do you end hostilities? How do you reach even a detente-like state of mutual coexistence? It'd be extraordinarily difficult. So I think, I don't want to say it's regime change or bust, but there's just kind of this recognition of that, it'll be very strange to see how things get here. And the other thing is, if you are Israel, this is the best chance you're ever going to have to take the entire nuclear program, if not back to square one, as close to square one as you can possibly get. So I would not expect this to happen. And if Iran is really serious about, we want peace talks, maybe you stop firing ballistic missiles at Israel before Israel eliminates your ability to do that. We should point out.
No, that's exactly right. And it could be a matter of, the devil is more predictable than the devil you don't know. And you don't know where Mossad has all their folks placed. They might have people close to the Ayatollah. They may have people pretty close to whoever would be most likely to replace him. I don't know exactly how that would work. It seems, at least from anecdotal evidence on Twitter, that a lot of folks in Iran would not be heartbroken over regime change. You got some rooftop parties as they're watching the munitions fall on military targets. It doesn't seem they're too concerned about Israel doing indiscriminate civilian bombing like the Iranians are doing in response.
Quite a bit of faith in the Israeli aim, if you're holding out your rooftop party.
There's bigger debates to have. Some are saying that, Israel can't drop the bunker busters. The U.S. would have to do that if we're going to do that. So does the U.S., start doing that? Direct engagement, that could certainly get us more involved, would obviously get us more involved. And do we want to be in that position at this point?
Could we misplace some bunker busters that just happened to, we left them on a pier not too far from Gaza. And apparently Israelis came along, found, well, if they're not going to be used, they're just lying around. These are bunker busters that fell off the back of a truck.
Exactly. Meanwhile, and I know Israel's going to pay close attention to this, the United Nations has a statement saying, quote, nuclear facilities must never be attacked. Such attacks have serious implications for nuclear safety, security, and safeguards, as well as regional and international peace and security. And I think Iran is fond of backing terrorists. The famous terrorist Hans Gruber once said, "Thank you very much, Mr. Cowboy. I'll take that under advisement." Pretty sure that's how Israel would look at this as well. Obviously, a major nuclear accident would be a humanitarian issue as well, and I don't think they want that. But they're going to do what they need to do to disable these things, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, the people who work in Iranian nuclear facilities really don't want radiation and plutonium going out everywhere if a bomb were to fall on the ceiling. And they kind of recognize the high risk of Israel doing an airstrike. They remember the Israeli airstrike that took out Iraq's nuclear program. They remember the Israeli airstrike that took out the Syrian nuclear program. They knew the odds of Israel going for a trifecta were pretty darn high. So as a result of it, I think they've at least taken the precautions to make it unlikely, although you probably could never completely eliminate the threat of some sort of radioactivity leak.
It's gone about as well, I think, for Israel in the first 96 hours. The one thing that's a mystery to me, Jim, is why they keep telling us where they have Mossad people and how this latest attack was all orchestrated. I would keep that stuff quiet until I know this operation is complete.
At that point, it's probably burned. At that point, the Iranians have found the launchers and things like that, so you have nothing else to lose. But also, there may be a psychological warfare effect. Apparently, the word Iran is that people do feel like the Mossad is everywhere, that they have run operations deep in Tehran. They arranged those rocket launching facilities inside there. And as I joked, the Ukrainians are saying, hey, that's what we did. That's our thing with the drones. I suspect we don't have a huge listenership in Iran for this podcast, but it turns out,
as we know,
of the Iranian listeners, for everyone in Iran listening, that person next to you is actually a Mossad agent. The other person is recording you for James O'Keefe.
And you got to think that the reason the Mossad has burrowed so deeply is that there's plenty of people in Iran who would be more than happy to see this regime go. So it's not entirely on their own. I think they've found some more than willing help.
Yeah, it was one of the points in today's Morning Jolt that autocratic regimes are hated by a lot of people, not by the people they oppress, but even sometimes the people within the machinery of it who realize either they develop a moral awakening and they realize that what they're doing is wrong, or very often they feel unrecognized. In an autocracy, other than the leader, you're a cog in the machine. You are replaceable. There's nothing special about you. If you're the torturer, we can find another guy to do torture just as easily. After a while, people start to hate that. After a while, people start to, hey, no, I'm special. I'm an individual. I deserve to be recognized. By the way, it works in both directions. This is part of how they require people to how they recruit people to become spies of the United States. But it's easy to find people in autocratic regimes who feel underappreciated, who feel unrecognized, and who might be wanting to be, I get to be a hero if I help the enemy and if I turn against my own state. So I suspect that's what's been more happening in there, and also just the sheer number of Iranians who are looking at the results of the rule of the mullahs and saying, what has this gotten us in 4 decades? How are we better off? Anyway, we're taking a long time on this podcast, but there's a lot to talk about.
No doubt about it. I'll tell you something that doesn't need to take a long time, and that is finding the right doctor for you. This cold is pretty minor, so I haven't needed to even think about going to the doctor. But have you ever woken up not feeling great? Maybe your eyes are all itchy and swollen. Maybe you got a tight pain in your neck, and you Google it. And of course, the first thing it says, oh, you've got 10 months to live or something, no matter what the issue is, because Dr. Google is always on the pessimistic side. But what you really need is an expert opinion, and it doesn't need to be complicated. You don't need to sit on the phone. You don't need to spend a lot of time investigating. Go to ZocDoc, which will help you figure out who you need to see. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality, in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment.
Greg, as I mentioned earlier, I was looking for an optometrist. I had moved. It had been a long time since I'd seen him. And I looked up in ZocDoc, and I found an optometrist less than 10 minutes away from my house. I was able to get an appointment really quickly, as easy as... At that point, you really don't have an excuse for putting off the appointment any longer, right? It's such a hassle. Well, what if there's a doctor who's a lot closer, and if they take your health insurance? Well, all of a sudden, you don't have any excuses. You finally go to it, and hey, it turns out my eyes are doing just fine. We're talking about booking an in-network appointment to more than 100,000 doctors across every specialty, from mental health to dental health, primary care to urgent care, and more. And you can filter for doctors who take your insurance, are located nearby, are a good fit for any medical need you may have, and they're highly rated by verified patients.
Yeah, I've used ZocDoc too, and it's very simple to navigate, and you can book that appointment by yourself. You don't need to wait on the phone at all. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/3ML to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/3ML. ZocDoc.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our second good martini of the day. And the New York Times, like we said in the open, has suddenly discovered free market economics, or that left-wing socialism doesn't work. They are not only recommending not voting for Zohran Mamdani in next month's New York City mayoral primary, they're saying don't even rank him, because this ranked choice thing, depending on how you rank folks, if your first choice doesn't do well, they'll toss that person out. Well, who do they vote for on the next round? Horrible system, but that's a pretty significant non-endorsement. And it's not only that, it's what they're criticizing him for, which is amazingly good news today, especially from the New York Times, where we have pretty low expectations from the editorial board. Unfortunately, they say Mr. Mamdani is running on an agenda uniquely unsuited to the city's challenges. He's a democratic socialist who too often ignores the unavoidable trade-offs of governance. He favors rent freezes that could restrict housing supply and make it harder for young New Yorkers and new arrivals to afford housing. He wants the government to operate grocery stores as if customer service and retail sales were the strengths of the public sector. And he minimizes the importance of policing. Most worrisome, he shows little concern about the disorder of the past decade, even though its costs have fallen hardest on the city's working class and poor residents. Mr. Mamdani, who has called Bill de Blasio the best New York mayor of his lifetime, offers an agenda that remains alluring among elite progressives, but has proved damaging to city life. And they go on to show how he really hasn't accomplished much as a state legislator and so forth. Jim, I think all you would need to point out is that he thinks de Blasio did a great job. That should be enough to pretty much disqualify him in the minds of hopefully most New Yorkers.
When you said what happened to the New York Times editorial board, and, when you see this kind of utterly dramatic, almost unprecedented change in thinking, change in behavior, I think the most logical explanation is pod people. From Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And for once, Greg, I'm rooting for the pod people. I'm rooting for the Body Snatchers. Great work, Body Snatchers. You're giving us some of the best hope for New York in a long time. New York, very used to alien invasions. Independence Day, Men in Black. I believe 15% of registered voters in New York City are actually space aliens. So, it's a diverse city. I was struck because you mentioned this when you're pitching the stories we should talk about. Using Bill de Blasio as a negative comparison is very surprising. That old saying, a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. Well, first of all, in New York City, a lot of liberals get mugged. Not all of them turn into conservatives, but in this case, it kind of does feel like, wow, de Blasio was a disaster. We don't want someone who's emulating that. So I went through and I was like, okay, so what? I'm curious, because while there was a whole bunch of candidates, Mamdani and Cuomo are the two frontrunners by a wide margin. And I was wondering what they would say about Cuomo, because I am vehemently opposed to Cuomo becoming the mayor, not out of any love for Mamdani or any other option, but just a recognition. I can remember 2020 to 2022, Greg. This isn't ancient history. This is not, I'm not complaining about Iran-Contra here, right? This is, yes. 3 years ago, he is a mass murderer of senior citizens in the nursing homes. And even de Blasio is like, look, I just killed one groundhog, all right? By comparison, I can't be that bad. And they say, look, Mr. Cuomo has his own significant shortcomings. This is, the classic New York Times editorial board, unintentional comic understatement. He resigned in governor in 2021 during his third term because of allegations of sexual harassment or inappropriate touching from at least 11 women. I want to point out, then Governor Cuomo groped an armed state trooper. You want to know how you know when you're really shameless and you know you can get away with anything? The board called for his resignation at the time because, this board, the New York Times editorial board called for this resignation because of the disturbing, credible nature of the accusations. We noted that his treatment of women was part of a larger pattern of bullying, self-serving behavior. Greg, they don't even mention killing all the senior citizens in the nursing home. They didn't even make the cut of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez complained that we couldn't have any more geriatric leadership. Now, honestly, Greg, Andrew Cuomo is 67. His age may be the single least objectionable thing about him. That's like the nicest thing. Oh, he's a 67-year-old man. That's the positive attribute. So kind of if you read between the lines, you could suggest that this is a quiet endorsement of Brad Lander, who's the New York City comptroller. Before any listeners like, this is a non-Cuomo, non-Mamdani option. This guy must be great. He was endorsed by progressives, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Elizabeth Warren in his run for comptroller. But you know what he's got going for him, Greg?
He's not a full-blown communist, and he's not a serial murderer and groper?
That's right. Exactly. He's not. He has a carbon-based life form who's neither of these two other guys. So Good for you, Brad Lander. That's a real accomplishment.
Yeah, you got to wonder why they're throwing this argument in. Is it because they think he's so far left that he could actually have trouble winning? Is it because for some reason they know Cuomo more from over the years and they figure maybe he'd be better than the alternative in this situation? You got to wonder why they suddenly got the free market arguments and started, sounding a little bit like Milton Friedman there. That it can't be because they're suddenly, very defensive of those positions. There has to be some reason. And so I'd be curious to see exactly the logic here. But the primary is next week. So we're going to have probably one of these horrible people on the ballot in November. We'll see.
Greg, if Curtis Sliwa actually, there's the likely Republican nominee, if he ends up winning the New York City mayor's race, I will wear a red beret on this podcast for 1 week. I will look like General Esperanza, ready to lead a coup. But Sliwa, compared to this bar scene from Star Wars over the Democratic side, at least we know he's opposed to crime, whereas large numbers of Democrats appear eager to subsidize it.
Exactly right. And don't forget, Eric Adams is an independent now, quote unquote, so he's going to be on the final ballot.
He's got really good odds to be the next mayor of Istanbul.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's talk about more for your health, specifically your skin health, as it relates to guys. Most skincare products really aren't made for men. And when they are, they're usually not that great. They're complicated, they're packed with questionable ingredients, or they just don't deliver results. And that's why Caldera Lab is different. Caldera Lab's high-performance skincare is made just for men. It's simple, effective, and backed by science.
Caldera has created an award-winning serum with 27 botanicals and powerful antioxidants to protect your skin against daily stressors. The eye serum targets dark circles, puffiness, and tired eyes with peptides and adaptogens. The base layer is a lightweight moisturizer with plant stem cells and snow mushroom for deep hydration and a matte finish. It's formulated for men and created by expert cosmetic chemists who specialize in men's skincare.
In a consumer study, 100% saw smoother, healthier skin, and more than 90% noticed better hydration and a more youthful look. And they don't release a product unless it delivers. Look, skincare doesn't need to be complicated, but it should be good. Upgrade your routine with Caldera Lab and see the difference for yourself. Go to calderalab.com/3ml and use 3ml at checkout for 20% off your first order. All right, Jim, on to our final martini now, and what a crazy thing to really wake up to on Saturday morning. We learned that both Minnesota Representative Melissa Hortman, a former Speaker of the House, in fact, in Minnesota, Democrat, had been killed along with her husband, Mark, and then Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman, also a Democrat, and his wife, Yvette, were severely wounded. Now, it looks like both of them are going to survive, even though Hoffman was shot 9 times and his wife was shot 8 times. Several of those were suffered as she dove on top of their daughter to protect her life from this gunman who remained at large until last night. That's a major relief. This guy is named Vance Bolter. He's 57 years old. He's being charged, oddly, with second-degree murder at this point. I don't know if that'll be upped at any point, but the guy did have a kill list that's now been released. He also had no Kings Rally flyers in his car. Kind of complicated on the resume, though. Allegedly, according to his roommate, he was a Trump supporter, but at the same time, he'd been appointed to state boards by Democratic Governor Mark Dayton and more recently by Democratic Governor Tim Walz. And so this isn't apparently fitting nice and neatly into anybody's political narrative. But like you said, Jim, in the Morning Jolt today, the more important thing is that everybody needs to condemn this to the point where anybody who even thinks about it should be discouraged from doing so.
Yeah, when we see political violence in this country, and I don't know if I've run the data and run the charts, but it certainly seems like political violence is occurring more frequently in this country. There's this whose side was this guy on? And some people, ask because they genuinely want to know. Some people ask because they very much want to tar the political opposition with that. So you're responsible for this guy. On the one hand, he shot 2 Democrats. It sounded like other Democrats in the state were on his hit list. Apparently he had, abortion providers on the list as well. If he's a right-wing maniac, it's kind of strange that he have a No Kings protest pamphlet in his car. Maybe he was picking it up because he wanted to target it or something. We'll see. It does have to be that the one of the state representatives that he killed was one who voted for a very controversial piece of legislation that was going to cut off health insurance for adult illegal immigrants in the state. A lot of Democrats, progressives were irate about that. And then just, a whole bunch of folks get appointed to things like a governor's workforce development board. This guy was appointed twice, first by Mike Dayton, then by Tim Walz. I don't think that we should read any particular meaning into this and the proclamation that put him onto this governor's board, but it says he was appointed because of the special trust and confidence I have in your integrity, judgment, and ability. I think it's cringeworthy. I don't think it's because, Tim Walz knew the guy or, personally thought he was a terrific fellow. It just was a matter of this is what they put on these sorts of documents when you get appointed to a state board that God knows if it even meets all that often and what recommendations it makes to the governor. So maybe this guy was a right-wing maniac. And if he was a right-wing maniac, that's terrible. If he was a general garden varieties paranoid schizophrenic, that's terrible. If he was any of these things, it's terrible. The nut job who shot up the softball field trying to kill a whole bunch of Americans who apparently had worked for Bernie or volunteered for Bernie at one point. That's really bad. That doesn't mean that your neighbor who voted for Bernie Sanders is also an aspiring terrorist or mass murderer. It's kind of this cheap shot to kind of say, well, this person rooted for this candidate, so therefore anybody who supports this candidate is therefore a dangerous maniac and should be treated as such. But I also think about, is there going to be a crackdown? Are we going to change the tone, particularly after the Gifford shooting? The Gifford shooting that everybody insisted was because of Sarah Palin and a map, when in fact the shooter was a paranoid schizophrenic who believed that grammar was a form of government control and brainwashing. So sometimes you get garden variety nut jobs. The other thing I'm thinking about is as you look back, Greg, I know whether you want to point to this at Oklahoma City, Reagan assassinations, Trump assassination attempt, like Gerald Ford. We've had political violence in this country for a very long time. I don't remember, other than maybe Oklahoma City, that there ever was any sustained period of people watching what they say or changing their tone or anything like that. People who really enjoy incendiary rhetoric are going to continue to enjoy incendiary rhetoric. I don't see any sign of this changing in our culture. The incentives in social media are still the same. When people says, you can find dangerous nut jobs and gunmen all across the political spectrum. Greg, have you run into a lot of moderate homicidal maniacs? Any of these radical centrist types are I simply want good entitlement reform. I absolutely insist upon keeping a balanced budget. No, I don't think it's that. It usually is the government is out to get me. My political opponents are evil. There are vast conspiracies, and my dog is talking to me. That's kind of the general message you get from this. And I don't think that necessarily applies even to the Ilhan Omars of the world. Ilhan Omar is a terrible lawmaker, but that's not to say that she has anything in common with the guy who shot up the ball field or any of these other folks. So sometimes I think there are people who just are either full of hatred towards the world, or they become fixated on a political figure, or they feel this is how they can stand out. I think the shooter in Butler seemed to have that. You notice I don't mention the names of these shooters because I want them to be forgotten by history, because that's, in the end, if fame is what they want, fame is what we should be denying them.
Well, that's a good point as well. Obviously, a tragedy when it comes to the Hortmans. Very thankful the Hoffmans are okay. Anyway, Jim, sobering note to open the week on, but a busy, busy news weekend and a busy start to the week. I'll see you tomorrow.
We get our jokes in early. Greg, I'll see you tomorrow.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a terrific Monday, and please join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.